Reddit. What is the creepiest true story someone has ever told you? Story 1. In my hometown, there was a true story about a guy in my neighborhood that was going into people's homes and stealing shoot and eliminate pets. He made one strike a night, and he was super careful, so he never got caught. On like the 9th or 10th night, they caught this guy, and he was my neighbor. He was 17 years old, and he did it for the thrill. Story 2. My grandmother's entire life, she had a recurring nightmare. In this nightmare, she would be walking down a long dark hallway, turn to the left, open a door, and see something terrible. She'd always wake up before seeing what it was. In her 40s, she, her husband, my dad, and my aunt were on vacation. They booked the hotel at the last minute, so they ended up having to get 2 rooms with 2 twin beds on opposite sides of the floor. My dad wakes up around 3 a.m. and can automatically tell something's not right. He calls out in the darkness, "Dad!" No response. He turns on the bedside light. "Dad?" He says, a little louder this time. Still no response. Getting worried, he slides out of bed and shakes his father. He doesn't wake up. My dad ran down the hotel hallway to my grandma's room and started banging on the door. My grandma worriedly opens the door, and my dad shouts, "Something's wrong with Dad." He leads her down the hallway, a long hallway, to the last door on the left. My grandmother reaches the door, turns to left, and sees her husband dead in bed. Heart attack. She never had the dream again. Story 3. One of my friends had a job in the hospital looking after patients, making beds, etc. I heard he randomly quit his job, wouldn't talk to anyone about it. I bring some beers over to his house and try to see if I can get him talking. He's a total emotional wreck. Finally get him to talk, and he says that he was working one night in the hospital when he heard a nurse shouting for help because someone was going into cardiac arrest. So, he runs down a hallway and some man runs towards him. They almost bump into each other and the man shouts, "Where's the exit?" My friend points to the exit, then runs into the room with the man going into cardiac arrest, only to see it's the exact same person who ran past him in the hallway. He died in front of his eyes. Story 4. I have a couple of stories, but this one always gets me. When I was around 7, my grandmother took care of a baby whose mother was an alcoholic and substances addict. This woman would bring her child, let's call him John, to my grandmother's house and leave him there for months at a time. Needless to say, our family became very attached and thought of him as part of the family. His mother came to get him one night and her tipsy boyfriend flips the car. John was in a coma for about 3 or 4 days. One night my older brother wakes everyone in the house up screaming and crying, saying that John is dead. Once my parents get him calmed down, he tells them that John came into his room crying, saying that he has to leave but he is scared and wants my brother to come with him. While my parents are trying to convince my brother that it was just a dream, the phone rings and it is my uncle calling from the hospital to inform us that John had died. This happened over 30 years ago, but I still get goosebumps thinking about it. Answer. Sort of the same thing happened to my grandmother. She was washing dishes in the kitchen in an empty house because my grandfather had taken all of their kids to the beach for the afternoon. Suddenly, she hears the voice of her favorite brother across the country shout her name, and she's so surprised she jumps and twists her ankle. She looks around but can't find him anywhere. My grandfather came home to find her sitting on the couch, icing her swollen ankle, and she tells him what happened. 2 hours later, they get the phone call from her brother's wife saying he died at the moment she heard his voice. Story 5. I read it online a while ago and cannot find it. It is basically a story of an IT guy who dropped a virus onto an unprotected Win98 node and discovered all these torture videos hosted around the world. Story 6. I live near a camp that I used to attend as a child. When I was 7, There was a counselor at the camp who was Russian. The camp has a very large staff exchange program with many different countries, and very weird at that. Counselors said he was incredibly fast, and during staff-only campfires, he would catch, skin, and eat live rabbits. He could do this crazy sleeper hold move. It essentially was a strangling move that knocked you out for a few seconds. You came to, and were fine a minute later. I saw him do it on a counselor once. The guy was out for about 10 seconds. He was forbidden to do it after that. However, kids got curious and started asking him to do the move. He would do it in secret, but he would increase the severity of his holds, which would in turn keep the kid knocked out for a longer period of time. One day, a camper went missing. He wasn't in his bunk, despite going to bed with his cabin that night. They did a camp-wide search, keeping us all on the soccer field for about 2 hours. The counselors had to start searching the water. They found his body under the sailing dock, completely out cold. Eat it. He was alive, but very unconscious. He had the strangle marks around his neck. Everyone knew who it was. They arrested the Russian guy and deported him back to Russia. Turns out, they never even sent an exchange counselor. Nobody knew who the fudge he was. Story 7. My 4-year-old daughter was supposedly asleep when I heard noise coming from her upstairs bedroom. I tried to listen but could not make out what was being said. I approached the room and she stopped talking. Thinking I alarmed her, I went into the room. At the time, she was sharing it with her 3-year-old sister. I walked in and saw the 4-year-old sitting up in bed. I smiled and said, "Is everything okay?" She said fine, but her sister said they were keeping her up. I asked who? My 4-year-old said sorry, but that she was talking. When I asked her who she was talking to, my 3-year-old sat up and said, "The girl in the window, she said you were coming." After I shoot a brick, I asked who the girl was, and they both said a girl comes and stands in front of the window at night and talks to them. Not knowing what to say, I said, "Okay," tucked them in and hung around outside their door. The next day, I asked about the girl. They said she came back but was mad. I waited a few days and asked again. My 4-year-old said the girl in the window was still mad. I forgot about it for about a week when my wife said, "Who are the girls talking to upstairs?" Freaked out, I ran upstairs and both girls were sitting under the window looking up. They turned and looked at me and asked if I wanted to meet the girl. When they turned around, disappointed, they said the girl left. It has been about 5 years since, and I have not heard about the girl in the window since then. Answer: I had a man in my vent. When I was 3 or 4, we moved into an old house on the corner of the street, which nobody would live in for very long. My mom told me that when we first moved in, one of my cousins refused to enter the house because she thought it was haunted. The only thing I really remember about the house was that my bedroom door had a giant hole in it, which I would cry though when I got sent to my room for punishment. But there is something else I vaguely remember. The man in the vent that I wondered why my grandmother didn't have at her house. It's a memory that my mother would resurface once she told me why we didn't live long in that house on the corner of the street. She woke up one night sometime in the early AM to noises of a muffled conversation. She goes to check on me. I'm asleep. She checks the living room. The television is off and so is the radio. She goes back to bed. She hears voices again, checks everything and again finds nothing. She decides to give up and go to sleep. The next morning, I tell my mom how I had a man in my vent who asked me if I would like to change clothes with him so he could come inside and live as me, and I could go outside and live as him. I told him no. We moved out shortly after that. My mom told me this story when I was a teen, and I remembered thinking about Grandma's house and the lack of men in her vents. I still remember eyes and a face in a vent, but I think it was a dream memory, not reality. Story 8. A friend of mine told me when she was 13, she and her friend were at the mall and an older guy, 40, started chatting them up and offered to buy them clothes. The girls went along, and he bought them each about $100 worth of stuff. Then he wanted them to go back to his place to show him the clothes, and the girls ditched him. Disliked to think what his plans were to recoup his investment. Answer: this kind of reminds me of last night. I walk over to a convenience store to get something to drink. I walk in, and there is this creepy older guy leaning against the counter, chatting up the young, cute cashier. There was only on car there sitting outside still running when I got there, so I figure it must be his. I get my drink, and the entire time I am checking out, the cashier is throwing me these "help me, this guy scares me" looks. I don't really know what I can do, since I don't want to be obvious in case the guy is totally some innocent SAP. So, I pay for my drink and then just hang out outside where I can see what is going on through the window. The girl keeps throwing me these obvious "thank you for not ditching me" smiles, until finally the guy leaves. From the moment he walks out the door until he pulls out on the street, he was locked on me with a passing glare I have never seen before. He was much smaller than me, so I was not really scared. I just maintained a neutral eye contact to show him so. I was not the one leaving and glaring, so I obviously was not the scared one. But the look he gave me made me seriously concerned for what might have occurred if I had not shown up or stuck around. It was a stare of pure hatred. Once he was gone, I took off. But he truly creeped me the fudge out, which, at 6'2", 220 lbs, it takes some true creepy to get to me. Story 9. When I was about 11, some friends and I were having a slumber party, and we all snuck out of the house in the middle of the night and went to a park about half a block away. We had been there at least an hour or so when I thought I saw a large, shadowy figure about 100 feet away, lurking in the shadows under some trees. We all turned to look and stared in the shadow's direction for about 5 minutes, trying to make it out. Right about when we had decided we were seeing things, the figure started running at us at top speed. We jumped up and ran back to the house as fast as we could go and locked the door. We could hear someone moving around the outside of the house, and then it began tapping on the windows. We couldn't wake anyone up since we would have had to admit we had snuck out. We spent the night huddled together in the middle of the living room, waiting to be taken down. Luckily, we weren't. Story 10. Up until I was about 6 or 7, I kept having strange dreams. It was kind of like a TV show. I'd watch this woman's life play out in a series of events. I didn't even know who the lady was I kept seeing in my dreams. Most of it was random stories, like her coming home from work one day to find out her oldest daughter had locked her sister out of the house naked. I had dreams of watching this woman beat her children. I watched this woman and her boyfriend get into substances. I watched them shoot up heroin before I even knew what it was. I even watched this woman die of AIDS in a hospital bed. None of it made sense to me until I even watched this woman's funeral. The last dream I ever had was the boyfriend violation the oldest daughter. Throughout that entire horrific scene, I could hear the woman's voice, "Tell her I'm sorry. Please, Vanessa. Tell her I'm sorry. I should have listened." At this point, I woke up majorly panicked, not just from what I had seen, but because this woman called out to me by name. So I finally go to my mom, and I'm talking so fast, trying to get it all out. And my mom is just standing there with her jaw to the floor as I'm recalling my dreams and her childhood memories. When I get to the apology, she started to sob uncontrollably. I want to note that my mother never told me anything about my grandma or her childhood prior to these dreams. I had never even seen a photograph of her. TLDR. My grandma showed me scenes from her life, asked me to apologize to my mom for not listening to my mom about the BF raping her. Story 11. A friend of the famous told me a story of her good friend, a very beautiful teenage girl. She lived in the boonies. One night she was getting ready for bed when she glanced out the window, saw a red flicker. She moves closer to the window, trying to figure out what she is looking at. Finally, she turns off her light, looks out the window to see a man with a video camera in a tree a few feet away. When they arrested the guy, they noticed that at the spot on the tree where he had placed his ladder, there were thick grooves, as though he'd been putting his ladder there for months. Story 12. This isn't a story someone told me, but it was a creepy experience nonetheless. Back in junior high, a girl brought a Ouija board to school. Look up how it works first if you've never heard of it before. Naturally, almost all of us thought it was complete BS, but a group of girls became obsessed with the thing throughout the day. Finally, I got tired of it and wanted to prove that it was nonsense, so I told them to guess my grandfather's first name, something I knew none of them would know because they weren't close friends and my grandfather lived hundreds of miles away. They guessed correctly on the first try. It was a little unnerving. Answer: I once used a Ouija board at my prep school in the States. When the dorm mother caught us, she got upset at first but ended up playing with us. She was also my French teacher and started to communicate with a deceased friend from France. She asked the questions in French without touching the pointer, and the board gave very clear and specific answers in French. My teacher started to cry. Out of the three of us using the pointer, I was the only one who knew French, and I assure you that I was not directing the pointer at all. TLDR. Crazy experience with Ouija board in another language. Story 13. My mom, grandparents, aunts and uncles, and several of their neighbors all swear they saw a UFO hover over my grandparents' house in the late 1960s. They said it just hung over the backyard, silently spinning, except for a faint whizzing sound for a minute or two, with all sorts of colors in a ring. My mom and grandma said they remember the television and radio in the living room turning on full blast, getting transmissions and broadcasts from other countries in other languages, and appliances in the kitchen were rattling. My uncle said it was hanging right outside his bedroom window on the top floor, and that he was too scared to move, just stood by his window, staring. Another time, I'm pretty sure I saw a UFO with my mom behind our house about 10 years ago. Our backyard is basically a mile of farmland, and there was a bright white light bouncing in the middle of the field, and then it just shot up and was gone. TLDR, aliens are probably stalking my mom. Story 14. 10 years ago, about 2 years after my mother had died, my dad was getting remarried. Before my stepmom was going to officially move in, we had to clean out a lot of the house because we were consolidating 2 families worth of stuff. One morning while we were cleaning, my babysitter and I found a fancy mug of my mother's with the emblem of her college and accidentally left it in the upstairs office. My dad came home from work a few hours later, and suddenly, the mug was downstairs in the kitchen on top of a sample of the wedding invitations. No one had touched it since the morning. We joked about the haunted mug for a while, how it was my mom giving her approval of the wedding. Nothing happened again for a bit until a little over a year after they were married. My stepmom had misplaced her car keys and spent half an hour searching every corner of the kitchen for them, which involved many laps around the island counter, which had been scoured thoroughly. However, on what must have been the 50th lap around, she saw that her keys had appeared on one of the corners, with the mug next to them. We put it on a high shelf and it hasn't moved since. TLDR, my deceased mother decided it would be cool to communicate through a mug. Answer: this reminds me of a bear that I placed in my dad's coffin during his funeral. It was a stuffed bear I used to sleep with all the time. I was 12 years old, so this scared the hell out of me. A week after his funeral, the bear reappeared on my bed. No explanation as to how it came back from being buried with my dad. But I still have Mr. Bear to this day. I'm terrified if I try to get rid of him, he'll just keep coming back. I'm 22 now, BT ha ha ha. Edit. Autocorrect is crap. Story 15. TLDR friend told me her purple dinosaur came to life at night and watched her. Friend explained to me why she took sleeping pills. Apparently, when they lived in GA, they bought an older house. Rich family, very nice home, which had some character. She claimed to find some old purple dinosaur in the crawl space while her dad was fixing some plumbing. Played with the dino for a few weeks, always slept with it in her bed, among other toys. One day she woke up to it staring at her standing on her chest in a different molding position than when she had found it, or it had been the past few weeks. Set it aside. Then next 3 weeks, same thing. Didn't matter if she put it on the floor in a drawer or anything. One day she locked it up, couldn't sleep. Heard the drawer unlock, open, and slam shut. Slight footsteps, and it was back on her chest. She was scared. So scared. She pretended to sleep while it shifted and sat on her chest, and watched her sleep. She told her mom the next day. Her mom didn't believe her until she was allowed to lock the damn thing in their room. Same darn thing. They moved to another house after other paranormal things started happening around the house. The Dino stayed at the original house, buried, if I remember right, for 1.5 years. One day it appeared at their new house, just standing like they found it on the kitchen counter. Got rid of it for good. I think they burned it and ditched it in the river. Never to be seen again. Friend has a repeating nightmare that goes away with the pills. She's older now and can't drink because of said pills. Has made numerous emergency hospital trips to finding scratches on her body. The hospital claims are from night terrors. Now maybe I'm just a freak about scary stories or fudge toys that talk. But the seriousness on her face and the tears that welled in her eyes, I was sold. Not sure if bullshit, but I believe, whether I want to or not. Scary shoot. Kid you not, had trouble sleeping in her current house. Clarification, she was 13 when the dino thing happened. She is 10 years older now. Story 16. When my cousin was around 7 years old, his room was in the basement. The basement level was half underground and half above ground. His room had a window, and his bed was right next to the window. One night, out of the blue, he wakes up and opens his eyes, and there's a man crouched right outside the window, just staring at him. He didn't know what to do, so he just froze for a second, then turned over in bed and turned his back to the guy and eventually fell asleep. Why he didn't run screaming to his parents' room is something I'll never understand. This went on for a while on random nights. The stranger would come and stare at him through the window. Sometimes he would actually tap on the glass with his finger. On the opposite wall of the window was a mirror. So one night when my cousin noticed the stranger was there, and he turned over in bed so as to not have to look at the guy, the stranger shined a flashlight and bounced the beam off the mirror to illuminate my cousin's face as if to say, "I can still see you." But the worst part was this. One night the stranger finally got bold and began to push on the window to see if it would open, but luckily the window was locked. To this day my cousin has no idea who the guy was or what he wanted or what he would have done had the window been unlocked that night. And to this day he still has not told his parents about it. He's 31 now. TLDR, stranger would stand outside my 8-year-old cousin's window at night and stare at him. Answer: I'm 19 years old. In my dorm room, it's the middle of day and am scared shitless. Fudge. This story actually reminds me of my childhood. When I was 8, I started sleeping in my basement on a couch. My dad slept on another couch perpendicular to mine. It was cooler in our basement, and I was closer with my dad more than my mom, who slept on the top story of our house. Well, the couch is slept on was right under some windows, so I would look out at night and scream and freak myself out, thinking someone was there. My dad eventually put pillows in the window for me so I couldn't look out. My dad passed away a year or so later, right before my 12th birthday in our basement suddenly from a heart attack. I was too terrified to go back into our basement for a while, but eventually I did, and I started sleeping on my couch again. 1.